Minister, could you please explain the reduction in the expenditure from the National Training Fund from 752 million in 2022 to 682 million in 2023, and can you outline the estimated reserve by the end of 2023, and why are we reducing our expenditure when the reserve continues to grow at such a rapid rate? Thank you.
Thank you to Deputy Conway-Walsh for this question. The 2022 revised estimates provide for expenditure, as the Deputy has said, of €765 million from the NTF. While these amounts have been allocated to the various beneficiaries, the final actual expenditure for 2022 is not known as yet because we haven't reached year end. The final allocation for the NTF in 2023 will be set out in the revised estimates. Any increase in NTF expenditure, all other things being equal, and without a corresponding reduction on the vote, requires an increase in my department and overall government expenditure ceilings. NTF expenditure increases general government expenditure and can only be accommodated within the fiscal strategy agreed by government. Budget 2023 has allocated, as the Deputy correctly says, 682.5 million for the NTF. The net difference between the 22 and 23 allocation is 82.5 million, and this is due to the removal of the temporary funding provided in 2022 for COVID, for the Brexit Adjustment Reserve and the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, which amounted to 131.4 million in 2021 and the provision of 48.5 million in the 2023 allocation for COVID and Brexit measures, as well as an increase of 0.4 million in the NTF baseline for access to apprenticeship initiatives. I know that's a lot of figures, but important to put them on the record. When finalising the revised estimates for 2023, further expenditure may be identified and categorised under the NTF, so the final amount, I suppose, is a matter for the Rev in the coming weeks. The cumulative surplus on the NTF at the end of 2021 was 1.102 billion. And the projected annual surplus for 2022, as set out in the revised estimates for 2022, was 88.7 million, but it's likely to be higher when all receipts and expenditure fall due. The forecast for the annual surplus in 2023 will be reviewed in finalising the revised estimates, taking account of all allocated expenditure and income projections. The forecast annual surplus for 2023 was calculated on a preliminary basis as part of Budget 2023 as at €338.4 million. While a prudent level of reserve is imperative to guard against uncertainties, I do think the current level of surplus evidently exceeds what may be conceivably required as any potential rainy day.
This year the money collected from the National Training Fund is estimated, as you said, to pass €1 billion for the first time. But you're only proposing to spend about 2/3 of that. 340 million will go unspent. On top of that, you have said that there's over €1 billion sitting in reserve from unspent funds from the past few years. That means that by the end of 2023, there will be €1.5 billion sitting in this reserve, sitting in a reserve accumulating no interest. This money was collected through the levy, which was with the commitment that it would be invested in education and training. And at the same time, you failed to deliver any meaningful progress on addressing the funding gap in the third level education budget. Will you commit to mobilising the NTF reserve to address the funding needs of further and higher education? We have a situation where third level education is crying out for greater levels of funding, and at the same time we have an ever-increasing reserve of the money in the National Training Fund. Minister, I'm requesting that you work with the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform to invest this money to address the very severe workforce planning challenges that we have.
Yeah, I fundamentally agree with the Deputy. I'm sorry, I ran out of time in relation to my last answer, but I fundamentally agree with the Deputy in terms of the size of the surplus. It is prudent to have a level of surplus. I think we'd agree on that. It's imprudent to have such a large surplus. I do agree on that too. The challenge, and it's a challenge for the government, I respectfully suggest it's also a challenge for the opposition to show how you do it, is that any expenditure from the NTF is categorised as the equivalent of general government expenditure. And we've signed up to, and I believe the opposition support, obviously operating within the general fiscal rules, the European framework and the likes. Having said that, I am doing exactly what the Deputy suggests, is engaging with other government departments, including the Department of Enterprise, Trade and Employment, to see how we can better leverage this. And I'd like to see a particular application of the NTF to support skills priorities and to develop the quality of our workforce. And with regard to that latter issue, I do envisage an expanded mandate for SkillNet Ireland. I think this is the way to proceed in leading workforce development as a government agency with extensive partnership with industry and employees. In addition to this, the Deputy will be aware the OECD is conducting a full review of Ireland's skills planning and development and can be considered in that context too.
Yes, Minister. I mean, I got cut off there when I want to talk about the very severe problems we have in workforce planning. The point was made to us today in the Education Committee when we were talking about mental health and the need for resources in mental health within schools and all of that, in terms of what's the point in advertising vacancies, because there's so many vacant places, because we don't have the workers coming through in the high demand courses that we need in relation to health. So we're not only threatening our economic stability, but causing a deep inequality in access to health and other essential services. So there's a real knock-on effect here. And I don't think it's good enough just to list the technical issues around the vote and the expenditure ceilings. We just really need to lift the bonnet on this, to get that money, to get it in a way that it can be spent. I've looked at the legislation, obviously, around it in terms of the flexibility that it will allow us there. And I believe that there is greater flexibility there than we are using at the moment in order to get that money invested so that we have the multiplier effect and we have the benefits of it.
So yeah, we got to get this right, and my colleague the Taoiseach has indicated too, most recently in his speech, I think, to the IBEC annual dinner, his wish, my wish, the government's wish, to be able to use this fund and an element of the surplus of this fund to provide an additionality when it comes to skills provision in Ireland. As I've said at my invitation, the OECD is currently conducting a review of Ireland's approach to skills planning and development, and these and other developments will support further consideration of this issue, including skills priority, our investment strategy, and the role of the NTF. But I intend that government would develop proposals within the year of 2023 as to how we can better harness this within the context of the rules, the law, and all the very careful considerations that need to be given. Can I just say in relation to the issue of training places, workforce planning, because I think it's a really important point. I have very strong views in relation to this. There are areas we must do much better as a state in terms of workforce planning. At the same time, though, we can't just reduce it to an issue of training, because there are obviously issues in relation to recruitment, the retention of individuals. In some areas, we train many more than the European average. So training is absolutely an element, an important element, but not the only part.